I'm Steve Davison. I work on a part-time basis as a clinical advisor. A gentleman who had been in hospital, he was fairly frail but not in the stages of nearly dying, but obviously very poorly because he was under our care. And on a Saturday, things started to go wrong at home, and normally his wife would have dialed 999 and an ambulance would have come and fetched him and taken him to hospital. Instead of which, she pressed the button on the TV, got through to us, through our clinical specialists. But what it did, it got us over the crisis without having to go through the crisis method. If it was a technology which is imposed on people, it clearly wouldn't work. You know, there's enough cynicism around to say this is just another way of cutting costs. It's not. It's a way of actually trying to improve people's care. And to do that, you need to involve people in that process from the beginning. The biggest threat to the technology is, what I hadn't understood at the beginning, is actually to the professionals rather than to the clients. Because it changes the way they do things and makes them have to rethink about the way they do things. The potential for making the life of the professionals easier is huge. The difficulty is it doesn't necessarily fit into the way they think. An example of that would be, if you are a consultant running a busy outpatient clinic, it's really easy because you're sitting there and the next patient comes through and the next patient comes through and there's a team of people outside who organise that for you. If I was the patient or client in that situation, it's an absolute pain. Because I've got to get there early, I've got to wait, I've got to park the car, I've got to get through, I've got to wait for hours before my turn in the queue turns up. What the technology does is it shifts that. It's no longer me necessarily having to wait ages for the doctor's appointment. Or if I am, I can probably do it in my living room, rather than have all the hassle that goes with it. And for the professional, for the doctor, it may not be quite so slick. I may not have people queuing up quite the same way outside my door. It may be a bit more of a hassle for me. But on the other hand, if I'm actually seeing somebody in their own home, the potential is much greater for an understanding of what's actually happening to them in a real-life situation, rather than the somewhat forced and artificial situation where they've been sitting outside my door for half an hour, getting stressed. I think it's extraordinarily difficult to develop an evidence base. When you're talking about the gold standard randomised controlled trials, which everybody kind of sort of flags as what we should be doing, they only really work in very, very narrow fields. You know, if you're trying a drug, does it work, does it not work? Is it the real drug or is it the placebo drug? You can't use that approach in things which are as complicated as social interactions and social interaction research. So you've got to use a whole raft of different measures to try and build up a picture. But in many ways, it's more about having the will to look at options and to take risks, and commissioning doesn't encourage people to take risks. And this clearly is from a commissioning perspective, a more risky option, because things can go wrong. Things can go wrong anyway, but there's always this sort of, well, what's wrong with the old way of doing things? Well, actually, we know we can't afford the old way of doing things. We have to find new ways of doing it. But the system doesn't encourage people to take those risks. The system encourages the people to look for the safe option, the tried and tested option, one which doesn't come back to me if it goes wrong.